because that's a Fugazi.
All right.
That's a Fugazi? How do you know it's a Fugazi? You looked at it for 2 seconds.
Well, it's a fake.
Yeah, I know what a Fugazi is.
It's all a Fugazi. You know what a Fugazi is?
No, Fugazi. It's a fake.
Yeah, Fugazi. It's a wazi, it's a woozy, it's a fairy dust. It doesn't.
Coin Fugazi.
Coin Fugazi.
Coin Fugazi. Coin Fugazi. Coin Fugazi. Coin Fugazi.
All right, we're back with the man himself, the benevolent dictator of Bitcoin ABC. Reference implementation for Bitcoin Cash, which basically bills itself, if you're unfamiliar with BCH, as the preeminent, heir to the peer-to-peer electronic cash system throne that currencies like, or cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, BTC, basically they're going a slightly different route. They're urging a kind of digital gold, maybe a banker settlement layer, all this other stuff that they're doing. But Amaury is the standard bearer. He's the man to talk to when we want to get the skinny on what exactly is going on with Bitcoin Cash and why it's important. But before we get into all that good stuff and high theory and economics and the state of crypto and why Bitcoin Cash is important, Amaury, man, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Exciting times, unnerving times, weird times. I think the last time that actually I caught an in-depth video, you've actually been doing more interviews, I've noticed, outside of the Bitcoin Cash proper milieu or like little circle. But the last time I saw you sort of address the Bitcoin Cash community was on the first during the 3rd-year anniversary, and you really went into kind of what is money and sort of contrasting our notions of it with Bitcoin Cash, and more recently guys like Bitcoin BCH CEO Hayden Otto have been making videos really kind of hammering that point. So I figured it's probably a good time now to I guess talk about it, bring it back up again. Why Bitcoin Cash? Why this notion of sound money or hard money? Sort of take us through your thinking as to why Bitcoin Cash is so important and so important right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for the first time in history, we have an opportunity that many previous generation before have did not have. If you look at the history of money, it's very much the history of civilization, and you can map like there is always like all the details are different, but there is the same arc that goes into the story of money that maps into the story of pretty much every civilization. And it's the fact that, so to start a civilization, you start small, you start with some small town or, like a village, something like that. And people in there are trading and they are quite successful and they grow and they get influence over the nearby towns. And, you repeat that for a few hundred years and boom, you get like, the Roman Empire or something like that. Or the Ottoman Empire or, any of those big civilizations that have happened in history. And, it's called the Roman Empire because it started in Rome, which was like not at all the city that it is today. It was like, a very small town. And they got all this influence around the whole Mediterranean. And so that's good, right? But as the whole ecosystem grows, the whole civilization grows, more and more people are economically interacting with each other. And using... so usually you're using precious metal to begin with, like gold and silver and copper and whatever. As the civilization grows, those tools prove themselves to be inadequate, right? Like first, they are not very easy in practice to manipulate. And you need to transport them around. you need like, if you're trading by boats, for instance, around the Mediterranean, then you need to bring a bunch of gold with you on the way in, but then your ship can sink or be attacked or whatnot, right? So the whole stuff is just not very practical at scale. And so you start having more and more involved scheme around that, right? Like you start trading notes that are redeemable for gold or whatever. Like you create abstraction around that initial source of money. And you get it slightly, little by little, yet in the territory of fiat money. And fiat money is much better for those civilizations because it's much more scalable. And so you can have exchange at, the scale of, the empire of the civilization. Like you can get much larger scale economic exchange. And that's very good economically for the place, right? So people might think that there is some devious game going on there, but there is not. Just, past some certain scale, using hard money, or at least the form of hard money that we used to have at the time, it just doesn't work. So
I like the way you're phrasing that, because I think when we talk to normal, noobs or however you want to paint them, people outside of kind of wonky economic theory or crypto or otherwise, and you start talking about this stuff, if you make it sound like a grave conspiracy, that's a really hard sell. Like,
and really it's not. And maybe,
right.
Maybe in some instance it is, but in general it's not. And this is why it's repeating every time. It's because, like, if you were to run the New York Stock Exchange with people actually trading gold, it would be completely unpractical, right? Like,
right.
The whole stuff would just grind to a halt, right? And most of the modern economy would grind to a halt with it. That would be just a giant disaster. And so you can argue that, like maybe some group, had some conspiracy to put the carpet toward them, and push things in the direction that favor them. And definitively there are solid arguments for that. And in some instances it happened. But more generally, this is not something that is avoidable. And the conspiracy can only be about the details of it, if there is one. It's just like, once you have a certain volume of economic exchange, the whole hard money trading gold is just not practical. It's just like, and so it would, like, if you were to refuse to move to some sort of fiat money, you would just put a cap on how big and how prosperous the civilization could be.
Right. And inevitably another society will invent it or see its usefulness and make their economy that much more efficient, and sort of
exactly.
Out,
and they would effectively absorb you. They don't even need to fight, right? So there is this hilarious scene, I think it's in The Life of Brian, the movie, where the people are complaining about the Roman, right? Like they're like, oh, the Roman Empire, they are the evil people, that rule over us now. And what did they ever do for them, And one guy is like, oh, like they built road. Yeah, but except the road, what did they do for them? Well, they built like sewers and stuff, and it's kind of nice before everybody was shitting in the street, right? Well, but beside the road and the sewer, well, like they bring water with the aqueducts and stuff. Okay, but except water and sewer and the roads. And you see that at the end, like, even though maybe some people were against it, like most people were just happy to see the Roman come and just like bring their civilization, because their shit was so much better than what everybody had at the time.
Right.
Like they conquered France, for instance, like in minus 52, I think, something like that before Christ. Anyway, like France was like a bunch of tribe that was fighting each other, and the biggest one were, like, thousands of people, right? And suddenly you have those guys, and they have roads and whatever, and they bring water and they build giant buildings and shit. It's just it's just a no-brainer, right? Like, even if there is no war and you give people the choice, like, like, do you want to live like in your small town with,
right,
like where you have to shit in your backyard, or do you want to live in that modern city with flowing water and sewers and roads, right? It's just not even a choice. like the choice is made for you, really.
One of my favorite authors, and you mentioned France, As Victor Hugo in Les Miserables. I just thought of this right now. It's completely irrelevant to the conversation, but he goes into, if you read the book rather than the musical, watch or listen to the musical, there's something like, I don't know, 13, 14 pages of the kind of the intricacies of the Parisian sewer system. And it sounds, it sounds mundane. It sounds very unsexy, but it's some of the most interesting parts of that book. And but the point being that you get to complex societies through these basic innovations that limit frictions, that make things easier for people to transact. And I think the saying goes, half of every transaction involves money. You need something to grease those wheels.
You effectively have to have fiat money, but then there is the dark side of that, is that at some point later on, people that are in charge of the money almost invariably end up overinflating it in some fashion, right? And as a result, then you see the civilization lose a ton of its economic, power and effectively become irrelevant. And to illustrate that, like recently I came across a graph of what is effectively like the world reserve currency over time. And you see, like it was the French one, and then it was the British one, and then it was, and each one of them lasts like less than 100 years, right?
Right.
And it just cycles through. And right now it's the dollar, and who knows how long that's gonna last. But I'm willing to bet that in 100 years, if we're still around, which like for me it's starting to be quite unlikely, but but if we're still around, it'd be very surprising that the US dollar is still a world reserve currency. That would be a departure from patterns that have repeated for literally millennia.
Yeah, and the fiat currency, for all of its advantages, and I think it's very important to set that up, because we have a tendency in the crypto space to sort of dismiss it, and that's a giant hurdle, I think, for most normal people to go, okay, hold on, you want me to give up the money that's literally printed, like, the heroes that have been, indoctrinated into me through public schooling, and you want me to give up the entire financial system? Like that's kind of a big sell. So if you frame it in the sense that, look, fiat makes a lot of rational sense, and it's an evolutionary process, but it's also subject to capture. That the downside is, as you said, that they can overinflate, but it also allows so money becomes politics by definition. And I think this is something that socialists or democratic socialists or progressives, or however you want to phrase them, they do have a point that it is politics. Like what you're holding in your pocket, unless it's private, which it's 9 times out of 10 not, you're holding politics in your pocket, and you're trusting.
Yeah, because effectively when you print new one, you have not, like if you issue no money, you don't have created new value, right? Like the same amount of goods and services exist in the economy, right? So suddenly you've increased the supply of money. And so you have the same amount of goods and services and value in general that is split it into more units of dollar, for instance, if you print more dollars. And so each dollar is worth slightly less. And so when you print new money, it's effectively you taking a small portion of the value of the dollar that everybody is owning and putting it in those new dollars that you printed. And then who are you gonna give those dollars to is the very important question, right? And this is where a huge amount of politics comes in, because if you are at the source of those dollars, you are effectively functioning value from everybody and receiving it.
And it's arguably the most regressive of taxes. It takes from the poorest of the poor, because a lot of the people
not really. It tends to take from the middle class, more
Okay.
because the poor, they don't have that much money to begin with, right? So there is not that much value from there that come to the
I
poor.
got you.
Though it put them into a tough spot because the value of their wages decreases over time. So they have to fight, they have to fight for their wages to increase on like in a perpetual fashion, right? Like they have to run to stay in place effectively. So that put them in a tough spot in this way. But most of the value is issued from more middle class people, because poor people, they don't have that much money, and rich people, they have most of their money in, like they are rich because they did something usually. So they own a company or they own, like buildings or whatever. And those stuff are not inflated. So.
And really the notion of their investments, of their wealth, is to beat the inflation that the politicians are creating. So in the United States, historically, it's been about 2 to 3% a year, depending on who you talk to. And so very wealthy, very well-connected people understand they've got to beat that. Whereas the middle class and others, they're sort of caught in this weird, this weird cycle. And when you have a political money, it really takes on a significance that I don't know that should is a very bad word to use here, but I don't think money should have that it's like a commodity or anything else. It kind of needs to function independently of politics. But I guess that's a kind of a heavier notion for another time. But I think it's safe to say that you've established that fiat is a natural extension of an efficient economy, but that it can, as I think most listeners will already know, it can be captured. It can be, as any political institution can, wielded in certain directions, whether we like it or we don't.
Well, and it ended up being that, right? Because say you are the government, and at some point you make some very bad decision and you become like highly in debt, right? Like you start a bunch of wars and whatnot. I'm realizing right now that I'm describing what the US has done over the past 20 years or so, but really, like when I said that, I did not have the US specifically in mind. Like if you look at the Roman Empire, the exact same stuff happened. For instance, like they started a bunch of war, it costed a bunch of money, and at some point the state is heavily in debt, right? And at this point, it become super interesting for the state to start printing more. And first, because like that's a way to get more money to begin with, but second, because a lot of inflation is actually pretty good when you are stupidly in debt, right? Because the value of your debt decreases.
Right, and also the first people to get those inflated dollars are the biggest beneficiary, and as it kind of cycles through the economy, the more screwed people tend to get. And it also insulates decision makers from responsibility, from accountability, because as you say, they can just kind of inflate themselves out of any trouble they find themselves, which is, I guess, kind of really apropos of what we're facing today. So we've got this, pandemic.
But they can't do that up to a point, right? Because at some point there is so much inflation that everybody loses their value, and all the capital that has been accumulated by, the civilization as a whole end up being vastly lost or vastly misallocated in the pocket of the people who inflated the currency. And at this point, the economy of the civilization doesn't work anymore, and it shrinks and dies. And that happened to every single civilization.
And I think it's really an interesting time, because the crankier Austrian School of Economics guys, libertarians, free marketers, they've sort of been sounding this bell since at least in the United States, popularly since the early 70s. And then
I think they probably overestimated how bad and how quickly it would get bad. Like if you look at historical data, so things tend to be faster nowadays because we have more technology that makes things faster. But if you look at the Roman Empire, between the time it hyperinflated and the time it basically dissolved and was irrelevant, there is like 200 to 300 years that go by.
And that's just enough time to forget all the lessons.
Well, plus after you get into the Middle Age and stuff. So a lot of lessons were forgotten during that time.
But I do think we're at something approximating that. I'm not going to say the Roman Empire falling, but I think there's something. Here's what I can at least say with 100% confidence. We're definitely in unprecedented monetary times. And I've noticed that even people who ordinarily cheer deficits and don't mind money printing, even they're getting a little weirded out by it. It's a conversation that I'm hearing outside of the normal circles, which is what I was trying to get at. So our guys have been talking
so
about,
right now, especially with COVID, with COVID, with the lockdown, especially, there's been a huge amount of economic damage that have been done. And to pally that, a huge amount of money has been printed. And so right now it's very worrying, right? Because there is the price of a bunch of stuff that is actually going up, which makes no sense whatsoever because the economy is actually doing very bad. So there is a complete decorrelation between the price system and the actual economy on the ground. And this is not surprising, right? Because the signaling that we use to know how the economy is doing, meaning like the money and the price system, is completely screwed up because there is a bunch of money that is flowed into the system. And so that completely, changed the signal, which tend to make things worse, right? Because when you don't have the economic signal that something is doing bad, then, you're not fixing it, or not as much as you should. And so we should expect, some big crisis, maybe not the end of the civilization, because as we talked about, it takes longer than people expect. And we're probably going to be dead by the time, our Western civilization is actually over. But it's certainly going to be like at least as bad as 2008 and probably worse.
Yeah. And I think there's enough precedence that I think the smart money, pun intended, is really looking at it. And the tricky part of this is that as those initial first dollars, pounds, as it kind of works itself in euros through and yen and so on through the world economy, those first tickets, those first digital deposits have given sort of a false positive, a false confidence. And it's like a slinky. It's got to work.
Yeah, and it's not just the money, right? Because it's also, if you look at recent, big institutional investor, what they do over the past few months, you look at what they say, and what they tell you is that we are buying whatever the Fed is buying, or the local equivalent of the Fed,
Right.
And from their perspective, it does make sense, right? Because the Fed is the only stuff that has money right now. So whatever they're buying is whatever is going to go up in price. So you want to be buying that. But that also means that there is a complete decorrelation between what goes up and down in price and what the actual economy is looking like. And so you should expect a correction at some point.
Right. And there's the Misesian tradition of malinvestment where, we can see, and it scares us that all this money is being pumped in the economy, and even someone without economic training can go, that's not good, at least.
Yeah, this is malinvestment at a scale that has rarely been seen in Western civilizations.
Yeah, and so you have this weird impact where politicians are insulated, at least immediately, from their decision making. So they shut down economies, whole world economies. And naturally, in a freer market, there would be just complete devastation. But they print themselves this pad, and then people become sort of falsely confident, and it sends the wrong signal. And maybe, and this is kind of maybe at least one of the lessons of 2008, is that all that funny money being pushed into, say, mortgages or wherever else, had businesses building too many houses, too many cars and so on. And then you kind of see this domino effect going on. And I think we're in the weird spot where you and I and others are kind of sounding this alarm again, and we seem a little nuts, but less nuts than we might have seemed in 2006.
But I remember in 2006, 2007, I was talking to people about that,
and you were seen as a weirdo, right? I mean, you're just a complete
yeah. It was like completely out of the scope of what they were thinking about, you know. But it's not as much the case now.
Mm-mm. And we're hoping, I think, by this point in 2020, that crypto would have an answer.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, yes and no. I mean, like BCH, this is what we're working on, but I see a lot of crypto is focused on yield farming and digital gold and whatever. And that's all of that is like, in many ways it's cool, but it's not civilization changing the way hard money that scale is. Because you know, that's actually how you end that cycle, right? Like you want something that has the good property of fiat money and the good property of hard money. Like that's where, to me, that's where something big is happening, something worth looking at. Everything else is cool, like that's cool technology, and there, you know, like there's definitively a lot of interesting stuff going on there. I don't want to denigrate that.
No, I'm with you.
But that's not civilization changing, or at least potentially civilization changing.
And it just doesn't seem to answer what looks to be inevitable or that is coming, in the sense that in
I don't see how yield farming is going to change anything to the huge economic crisis that is coming, for instance. Yeah. And that's definitely an interesting phenomenon, right? Because they want to do those decks and they want to attract liquidity, and they build like all those systems to attract liquidity. And that's cool. That's interesting. I don't want to, once again, you know, like, I don't want to sound like a crazy maximalist, because I'm not really. Like,
I got you.
It's cool that some people are working on that, and it's interesting stuff, and there is definitely use for that, but it's not where my attention is.
I think a lot of yield farming and decentralized finance and the sushis, the uniswaps, and the comps and the balancers and all that stuff, it presupposes the system stays in place and that they have a firm foundation on which to jump off of. It's all kind of built on a weird house of cards. And Bitcoin Cash, okay, so Bitcoin in 2009 was seen by a lot of us almost instantly as like, hey, here we go. This is a potential answer. You know, but something happened along the way.
And presumably we cannot know, right? But presumably the fact that it launched in 2009 is not completely random.
Oh, no.
Like, especially with the message that is in the Genesis block, right? So even though Satoshi never really made a statement of intention about that, you know, he never made it clear, but it seems, at least to most people at the time, that it was, you know, like a proposed solution to the madness that was going on economically.
Yeah, the Chancellor and all of that, and the Times of London. So you know, we had an 11-year head start here on you know, and crypto, like Bitcoin, BTC, and some others, have only known bull runs, right? They've never known a slogging market. We got a slight taste of that at the turn of this year with some of the COVID stuff. And what was interesting about it is that the people did not run to crypto.
No.
And I remember remarking on that, going, they stayed in fiat. And
no, that's something I've worried about for a few years, right? Because crypto has gone another way. Crypto is not really a solution to that problem anymore, like at least most crypto. And when people are poor, because, you know, like for whatever reason, they lose a bunch of money, many of their assets decreased in value, they need to sell stuff, you know, to continue to go by. Even the stuff that they would want to keep. And this is why when you see those crash, it's often not just one stuff that crashes, right? Even though there is one stuff, like let's say, you know, like there is a crash in oil or whatever, right? Whatever asset crash in price, and you see other asset following, not because those other assets, there's something wrong with them that that make them less valuable suddenly. But because people lose a bunch of money on asset A, they need to start selling other stuff to cover their loss, right? And so they're going to sell asset B and C and D to cover the loss that they have in asset A. And if a lot of people do that, asset B and C and D are going to lose value as well, right? So when something crashes really hard, it tends to pull everything down.
And so crypto basically just took off. So whatever its other faults, Bitcoin became digital gold, and again the banking settlement layer. Ethereum wants to be kind of a world computer and do a bunch of different things. Ripple just straight went for the banks and said, love us, and they got Bill Clinton on board. Tether, I'm still kind of wondering what Tether's about. And then you kind of go through all the other maybe top 10 coins. Some of them are exchange coins. Like you talked about, yield farming is. I mean, there's at any one moment in crypto, there seems to be $1 billion that can swing from here to there in a blink of an eye. Like they're just chasing. My suspicions is it's kind of the same 20 people. They just keep throwing money at because it's always close to $1 billion. Oh, did you see that XYZ new phenomenon? It's 700, 800 billion, $800 million rather. It's always right around $1 billion, but
it's probably, I don't know if it's always the same people, right? But there's probably some kind of effect, like when it reach 1 billion, suddenly you have a new set of people that is looking at it.
Yeah.
And potentially it can set the price down or should have even higher.
That's
I don't
a
know.
good point. That's
I'm
a
just
good point.
speculating.
Yeah. No, I can kind of see that as well. But the point is, crypto's chasing something entirely, and as you stated so perfectly, it's not trying to solve whatever problem it set out to solve anymore, and it's not looking at what we're talking about. I think you can sort of tangentially hear it on the peripherals, right? Oh, we do this, we do that, we do this, we do that. Oh, and there's P2P cash, somewhere in there, we might touch it sooner or later. But they essentially want to become meta nets. Bitcoin Cash for 3 years. It's that meme with the boyfriend looking back at the new attractive girl that's walking. But Bitcoin Cash has stayed with the peer-to-peer electronic cash meme, the medium of exchange meme. It really has sort of.
Yeah, though I think a bit too much in the sense that medium of exchange is just one of the properties of money, and to me, store of value is also very important. Like the revolutionary aspect of it is that you can do something that is a good medium of exchange that is also a good store of value,
right?
Which you could not do before, right? And doing any one of those stuff, to me, is not very interesting. Doing both is very interesting. Because, like medium of exchange, we have Visa and MasterCard and whatnot, and it's working great. I can pay online, I can pay any shops around, I can pay contactless now even. So like the medium of exchange stuff is a solved problem technologically, but all those tech, they don't protect your privacy, they don't have the property of cash, and they don't have the hard money properties. And on the other end, there are store value, you can buy gold and gold, 2 centuries ago, that much gold was buying you like a pair of shoe or whatever, and about the same amount of gold is going to buy you a pair of shoe today. The value is extremely stable over a long period of time. And that's cool, right? But there is not a good tech that does both. And I think this is where something truly big can happen. And I think, in the BCH ecosystem, people have been very focused on the medium of exchange aspect of it. And that's great. That's fantastic, right? But that's half of the equation. The store of value aspect of it is also tremendously important. And I would argue that those two properties, actually, we code them as being very, very different, but deep down, they are the same, right? They are about transporting value across time and space, right? So when like the store of value use case is effectively transacting with your future self. you're sending money to your future self. Yeah. So it's not fundamentally different from a medium of exchange. It's just like there is a time component that is more important. And for something to be a good store of value, when you understand it that way, you need for it to be very predictable against long period of time, which BCH has not been good at. Like if we are honest, like there is a revolution every 6 months. So there is like many actors that don't want to adhere to any roadmap and whatnot. So that makes it a really bad store of value. And I think the market is valuing it that way. To me, that's the number one reason why BCH is at that level of price rather than higher. Like that's the number one lever we can act on.
And can it be that in a weird way now, because basically the ecosystem has left the medium of exchange meme, it's kind of gone on to other things, and it's sort of missing what you and I would consider to be the prize of crypto. The fun, like, in other words, we're not discounting digital gold, we're not discounting DeFi and everything else that everybody wants to do, but the foundation that it has to be both medium of exchange and a store of value. Is this maybe the perfect time to like it? I guess the question is, how do we get from?
Well, yeah. So yeah, I see where you're going. Yeah, with the current economic environment, there is a huge opportunity right now. Like the potential is right now, and that doesn't mean that the tech is not going to be valuable later. But you don't know. Like sometimes you have a window of opportunity that are open, and you need to seize it. And if you don't seize it, then you don't know when it's going to reopen again next, right? And maybe by that time you have someone that is better than you that's going to seize it instead of you. So the window of opportunity is starting now, right? Like it's opening. It's opening. People are going to be very pissed at the financial system very soon. Those that aren't already, it seems like a lot of people already are, but it's going to get worse before it gets better, right? And so people are going to look for alternatives. And that's our opportunity to present a credible alternative. If we don't, then, if we don't, then it's not going to happen this time. And we're going to have to wait for the next time. For that to happen, and that can be like 10 years down the road. The last time was 12 years ago, right? So you don't know when the next time is,
right? And if they only know about Bitcoin, the BTC side, that's going to be a rude awakening, because once people start jumping into BTC, because it has the network effect, it has the name, it's the Nike, the Coca-Cola, the tissue, whatever, the Kleenex rather. The brand, they jump into that, they're in for a hellish time. So if they didn't like Fiat, they're not going to like BTC. Losing value.
Yeah, Bitcoin being successful is like the worst stuff that can happen to Bitcoin, because it becomes like the experience becomes truly horrible when that happens, and it gets people to look for other stuff.
And we saw that in 2017, where
we saw that in 2017. Yeah, a lot of people coming in from Bitcoin because Bitcoin became unusable.
And so this is where we're at now. There exists a coin that can take up that slack, that can fill in that gap. I can't think of I keep hitting the same sort of metaphors, but that can kind of that can do.
But the potential is there. We need to realize it, right? Right now, it feels to me, and maybe like this podcast is actually a good opportunity to refocus people. It seems to me that people are focused on stuff that are not very important. This is what's really important. Everything else, we're gonna look back in 5 years and be like, like all those stuff that we find very important right now, like what a pack of shit that was. Like it's completely irrelevant Half of it we did and turned out that it was not great, and stuff that we didn't do and we are very upset about it. We're gonna look back and realize that we don't really want them anymore. Like all the stuff people are talking about right now is not gonna be super relevant in a few years. What's gonna be super relevant is like, do we seize that opportunity that is opening, or do we not?
Yeah, it's a grand challenge, and returning to the fundamentals, going back to what makes things work, that combination of having the convenience and the quickness of fiat with sound money, hard money properties, I think is the value proposition of Bitcoin Cash. And honestly, I'm struggling. I was trying to find another coin that I could maybe contrast it with, and each kind of has elements of those properties. But I don't think, and I'm not trying to be a homer. I'm not trying to suck up to you. I really do believe this, that I think only Bitcoin Cash, at least at the moment, has that.
Yep. Yeah, I think so. Like arguably, you could find others maybe, but they're not that much, right? Especially like in the top 20, almost none, except BCH.
Like so you can't think of any other coin or any other project that people should be focusing on other than BCH, and maybe
especially if you take into account the roadmap, because right now there are some coins that have properties that are close to BCH, right? So if I think about Litecoin, for instance, in many ways it's close to BCH in terms of properties, but it doesn't have that roadmap that bring it to less than 2 second confirmation time and huge scale, and that's what you need to be a very good medium of exchange at scale, right? So
you definitely need
that set BCH apart.
You definitely need a dedicated team to be able to kind of keep moving with the punches and rolling with tech debt and the accumulation of tech rot and all that stuff. But you need with Litecoin, that's a great example, because I think that was sort of to head off the potential of something like a Bitcoin Cash happening, because obviously it predates it. But that's an excellent point. So there you have, and you'll often hear people who are maybe upset that Bitcoin Cash became its own thing and forked away from BTC in 2017. Well, we already have Litecoin. So that's a fantastic contrast there.
Yeah, Litecoin doesn't really have a roadmap though. Like what they do is follow BTC and do the same thing and tweak a few details and like this is, they explicitly say that they do that, right? It's not like, it's it's not like it's a trick or whatever, right? Like there's just very little development happening on it, and if you ask Litecoin's leader, they're gonna tell you as much. So I think this sets BCH apart, right? Like we have a plan to go board scale, we have a plan to go seconds in confirmation, and we have a plan to be hard money, and we need to convince people that we are committed to that plan so that we can be a store of value. There's this dude that put a huge amount of money into BTC recently. I can't remember his name right now, but he was making the rounds of news in crypto media lately, and he was like, I don't care if you have like this great idea to do this and that and want to change the direction of the project there, like to do like better smart contract or to do like cheaper transaction or whatnot. It's like, there is this project and we know where it is going. You know what it is and you know what it is not. And you know that the people within the project have a very strong commitment into like, keeping it what it is. And to him, it doesn't really, like what he says is basically, it doesn't really matter to him what it is. And even if it's the best, it matters that it's predictable over a long period of time, that it remains what it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I remember, because this is fairly recently, he actually used the Bitcoin Cash fork as in his reasoning. He said, "Look, it it fought off this fork and it retained this. So a lot of BCH.
I think he was correct though.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. They're going to get very mad.
I don't share his view and his preferences, but if you take one step back and look at it from, high level perspective, on one side, he has a currency. He knows that it's not the best. He knows that whatever property you are looking for, there is probably some crypto out there that does it better. He knows that this is not what it is about, right? He knows also that in 10 years, Bitcoin is going to be like, it's very predictable what it's going to be. It's going to be like roughly the same stuff as now. Maybe they're going to deploy like Taproot or whatever, but it's not going to change the system in any fundamental way that is unpredictable, right? So what it doesn't want is people fighting over where this project is going. Because when that's happening, that means that it's not predictable where it's going to be in 10 years. That means that you cannot put large amount of money in it for 10 years.
And I think that's where Bitcoin Cash can now learn from his example. And I think more recently he's begun dumping some of the coin, which is a hilarious thing, because I think after a while, I think you sort of get caught up, an investor gets caught up in that initial Bitcoin hype, and then he starts to see, mempools clogging, and he starts to see.
I think you are nice. I think this is not what's happening. I think that when you are a big investor, as big as this guy is, and you are buying, you don't want to say anything, right? You want to say something when you want to sell, right? Because you, having bought hundreds of millions worth of BTC, is going to do like a huge amount of news. It's going to make people bullish about BTC. And so you can sell them your BTCs, right? So I like when you see those big news from big players saying that they have bought a huge amount of BTC, I think you should expect them to sell in the coming weeks next to that.
And it's eerie, because that's exactly what happened. I mean, at least.
But that happens every time, right? So it's not like it's a big surprise.
Yeah, and that's where I think the advantage is for BCH. We don't have the Lambo guys to the degree that.
But we don't want to reject them either, right? We just don't want them to let them run the show. But if they want to come, So
it seems like it's the Goldilocks coin, right? It's the project with at least the potential to get it right, moving forward, making sure.
I think this is the one that has the most potential. You're right, and that this is why I'm still focused on BCH. But I think there are challenges, and the main challenge is that there is little understanding of the importance of those property that makes a good store of value.
Boom.
Right? Because when you see people arguing, so the roadmap says Avalanche, and it's fine. And maybe you have this great idea that you think is going to be even better than Avalanche. And suddenly you start like a competition within the coin about your new idea. Now BCH is much less valuable. Now you don't know if you're gonna get Avalanche or that other stuff or two coins or whatnot, right? Like suddenly the future of BCH is unclear, and so choosing the worst option and committing to it is actually better than bickering about what option is best for a very long time.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that over the 3-year history of the coin. Is that just when it seems to get traction, there's a new division, there's some new controversy, whatever that is. And I'm not blaming anybody in particular. I'm just saying that it's
because I think there is this idea within BCH that, there's those guys, they made that new cool stuff. It's going to be great. We need to promote that because from the perspective of many people in that ecosystem, there is shit happening. Maybe those people, the idea is even better than what we already have on the roadmap, and therefore we should explore that and all of that, right? And that's great, and we should like promote that and tell everybody about it, that there is all those cool stuff that are happening on BCH. But the flip side of that is that it makes BCH a terrible store of value. because what people are going to hear is that there is like, the roadmap say we're going to do Flurb, but there are those other dudes and they want to say Sblorg, and Sblorg, according to them, is much better than Flurg. And it's going to make the coin so much better. But the people that are developing Flurg, they disagree with that. And I don't understand any of it anyway. I don't really know what's a blockchain. I just don't know where this project is going, and I'm not going to get in it. Right?
It's maddening. It's infuriating. And as you're moving along and you're trying to set, you're trying to onboard new people, it's this, when Bitcoin Cash does get any kind of pub, it generally gets it in a negative manner and seen as a kind of a contentious space to argue, a giant debating salon. And so now it seems to be moving away from that there's going to be something of a finality that the coin is moving forward, the project is moving forward, adhering to a roadmap, making sure that everything, I guess, kind of falls in line to hard properties.
Yeah, that's what we're doing. And I think we don't have a choice because the opportunity is now. So we need to do that now. There's no, if we continue doing that and eventually resolve all the stuff the way many people want it to, then we're going to have missed the window of opportunity. So it doesn't matter if we resolve anything anyway. I'm not going to wait like 15 more years, doing something that doesn't work. The opportunity is now, so we need to make something happen now.
Boom. I don't think there's much more to say, at least at this point. I think you've made the case that BCH is uniquely positioned, that it's something to watch, that it's carving out for itself either on purpose or just the fact that no one else is thinking this way, that it's both a store of value and a medium of exchange, that it's going for the hard money crowd, the sound money crowd, and it's doing so methodically. How can people kind of keep up with your work, what you're doing, how you're trying to move Bitcoin Cash forward? Where can they find all things Amaury Séchet, Bitcoin ABC, and so on?
Yeah, so there is bitcoincash.org, obviously. It's very much targeted to for people that are not deeply into crypto. It's like, I know nothing about BCH. I want to know what that is. And I can go on bitcoincash.org. So that's the first, I guess that's the first entry point for people that are, a bit more knowledgeable and that want to know a bit more. We have a blog at blog.bitcoinabc.org where we publish, more detailed information for people that are already interested. And we also have a mailing list that you can register to on bitcoinabc.org. And for myself personally, I guess Twitter is probably going to be where I'm the most accessible. It's going to be diddlenix, at diddlenix on Twitter.
Very cool. We'll have links to all of that in the show notes. And I know you're a busy guy. I know you've got a lot on your plate, especially in the coming months. So I want to rain check. I want to make sure I can grab you in a few more weeks here and kind of check in on where you are in that process of bringing hard money to the world. So best of luck to you, man. And thanks again for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.